Hi, so just a couple of issues that I'll mention that we're going to raise today. First of all, obviously, the parents of Harvey Morrison Sherratt, Gillian and Stephen, are meeting with the Taoiseach and the Health Minister today. And we all were horrified and shocked at the announcement over the weekend of the whistleblower hearing that Harvey had been taken off the list, allegedly because he was considered palliative, to use that phrase. So I'm sure we will hear more from Gillian and Stephen today, but I just for the record want to say that there's no more faffing around here. We need a full public and statutory inquiry into all of the issues relating to spinal surgeries, to CHI and of course to Harvey himself, so that this does not happen again. And this piecemeal process that the government have been trying to foist onto parents of, you know, we look here, we look at this, we need the whole situation publicly investigated. The second issue I actually want to raise is something that we've been inundated in our office, which is from taxi drivers, about the new model that Uber is trying to foist. It's a very important issue because an awful lot of working class people now depend on being taxi drivers, Irish workers, migrant workers as well. And it appears that Uber is trying to set a fixed fare rather than a metered fare, in an attempt to undermine the taxi drivers and undermine locally agreed procedures that the NTA can regulate. It's a well-documented international strategy. And we all know that it's become just the Wild West in many other countries. Uber hasn't managed to do that in Ireland yet, but this is what it's attempting to do. And it's undermining the ability of taxi drivers to have some say over their own livelihoods. And ultimately it will mean worse conditions for them, but also worse conditions. We want a properly regulated public transport system, not a Wild West situation. So it's something that we'll be asking the Minister for Transport to intervene into. It's part of the public transport system. This idea it's a private company, they can do what they like, is exactly what Uber want. And lastly, I'll just mention that I'm going to be launching at 1 o'clock more details of my historic fox hunting bill. It's the first bill to ban fox hunting in Ireland, and we will have lots of advocates and groups outside at 1 o'clock. We're going to be putting this bill to second stage. It was a major issue of importance in the presidential debates, actually, and we're not going to accept that parties will whip their TDs into line. We don't think that worked very well in the presidential election, you know, in all sorts of ways, and they need to learn from handing down orders from hierarchies above, because we know that the majority of TDs would like a free vote on this. So we'll have further details on that at 1 o'clock.
Just quickly, obviously yesterday was a great day. I think Catherine Connolly made a fantastic speech indicating that she's going to be true to what she spoke about in the campaign. It was clear that the same themes of the campaign carried through to her first speech as president, that she is going to be a voice for peace, against militarism, speaking out in terms of housing justice, economic equality, and for the Irish language. So I think that was really very, very positive day, gives lots of people hope in what is a very dark world. And I think it's then on all of us who remain outside of the Áras to try and continue the movement that she built, of which she was a symbol, to fight for fundamental change in this country, for the end of the rule of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. And we're optimistic that joint activities around the Occupied Territories Bill, around the defence of our neutrality, on housing, on the cost of living, will be forthcoming in the coming weeks and months as part of continuing to work together and giving people a real and fundamental choice in the next election. Secondly, just to add my voice to Ruth's call for a public inquiry in relation to the death of Harvey Morrison Sherratt. You know, it blows my mind that we still don't have this commitment. I mean, it is months now since they had a meeting with ministers. They emerged from that meeting with the sense that they had been given a commitment that there would be a public inquiry. That was slightly kind of refined in the Dáil in terms of what the minister has said, where it was said that, well, a range of options will be offered, but of course, we'll, in the final say, the parents we will listen to. I mean, the parents are absolutely clear, and obviously this horrendous protected disclosure gives added weight to that. There needs to be a public inquiry, and we need to be debating in the Dáil why this simply isn't being granted. Thirdly, in relation to COP, Micheál Martin made a fine speech in Belém in Brazil. The problem is that fine speech bears no relationship to the actions of his government. You know, he's a man who's standing up on a world stage saying we need to follow the science, we have to be brave and so on. And the truth is that this government is bending over backwards for fossil fuel interests, going to allow the construction investment in more fossil fuel infrastructure, the most dirty fossil fuel on the planet, in the form of imported LNG. It's a government that's bending over backwards to the interests of big tech companies, you know, heading towards 30% of our energy being used by data centres. And the consequence of all of that and much more, including big agribusiness interests, is that, you know, far from following the science, we're not on track to reach half of the legally binding targets. So either the government, Micheál Martin, means what he says, in which case the government needs to radically change tack, or it is just kind of empty bluster and like gross hypocrisy in terms of what he says and then versus what he does. And then finally, just in relation to the housing crisis, obviously we're going to get the housing strategy tomorrow. I would say that whatever numbers and so on are in the housing strategy, we can take all them with a pinch of salt. We know that this government went into the last election knowing that they were on track for about 30,000 houses being built and telling people they were on track for 40,000. The key targets that we need to see are in relation to the building of social housing and genuinely affordable housing. We see at the moment how the affordable housing plans the government has are linked to market rates and are not affordable. They're not linked to affordability. That's what we need, as opposed to talking about how many houses the private market will build that they actually have very little control over. The other thing that we're seeing is that this government, you know, is a strongly anti-renter government. We've seen the new figures from Daft in terms of the record rises in rents. They're going to accelerate under the government's new plans to effectively tear up what existed of the rent pressure legislations, or certainly amend in such a way that they're going to allow accelerated increase in rents. And that's the purpose, that's government policy, in order to attract in institutional investors, in other words vulture funds. But we're also seeing it now at a council level with Dublin City looking to hike rents of council tenants. Indications that certainly South Dublin County Council will follow suit, and potentially other councils across the country. There was a protest yesterday outside Dublin City Council, and hopefully pressure will build on the councils not to go ahead with these increases in rents for council tenants.
Well, you mentioned the Occupied Territories Bill there. I'm curious, there's been a few statements recently with the Oireachtas committees that FDI could be negatively impacted, and therefore the economy could be negatively impacted by it. What is your response to that? Do you think government should be cautious of how it approaches it?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the real argument. You know, the government, in particular Simon Harris, likes to hide behind the suggestion that there's some legal problems in including services. There is no legal problem in including services. The Attorney General never suggested it previously. So this is the actual argument, and Micheál Martin is a bit more open about making the actual argument that we don't want to endanger FDI by blocking trade in services with the occupied territories. Certainly we don't think, and I think the majority of the public don't think, that we should be blackmailed by major multinational corporations or the US administration led by Trump from taking quite minimal, limited action against the genocidal state by these threats. We should follow through. It is over a year now since you had a leaders' debate in the general election, and where Simon Harris and Micheál Martin gave commitments that they were in favour of the Occupied Territories Bill, and now it's very clear that the heels are being dragged to an extreme degree. It was very interesting that you had, so the government went away, did their own bill, fine, brought it to committee for pre-legislative scrutiny, and then the committee unanimously, including Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael members, recommended that it should include services, contrary to the government position. So it is up to the government now. Our call is very, very clear. needs to be done, needs to be implemented before Christmas, and it needs to include services. This is the very, very least that we should be doing. And the government, I really fear that the government is trying to now just step away from it, use the so-called ceasefire to say, we wouldn't want to rock the boat now, and go against the mandate that they have for this, and go against the view of the committee, as well as plenty of experts.
Just say as well, though, the scope of the bill is actually quite narrow anyway. It's not about even all of the trade in Israel. It's a very limited amount. Secondly, we're overly reliant on FDI as the core of our economic strategy, but there's so many generous incentives that this government gives for foreign direct investment. The corporation tax rate, we have all of the other attractions of language, geography, etc. So I'd say a lot of this is just sabre rattling.
Would the position remain unchanged if there was sufficient proof to suggest that jobs would be jobs would be lost as a result of it?
Well, I don't think we should be blackmailed by the Trump administration, by the genocidal Israeli state, or by major multinational corporations. And I think you have to take any threats or evidence that they produce with a very, very large grain of salt. It's in their interest to scaremonger and say the economy's going to collapse or whatever. The truth is, and actually the government, when it suits them, make this argument that there's very limited amounts of trade with the occupied territory. So on the one hand, they make that argument, but it's hard to simultaneously make that argument and then also say the impact of doing it would be so great that jobs would be lost.
So I just wanted you were talking about the sex workers bill which you were bringing in a couple of weeks back, and I was wondering what type of reception did you receive, and do you have any view that it could be advanced or not?
Well, the bill was drafted by sex workers themselves with legal advice, so we're tweaking it, we're working on it, and it'll be properly launched hopefully by the new year at the latest. But obviously it was announced at a festival and so on, so it has gotten a lot of attention. Overwhelmingly positive. I haven't had any negative interaction. I think decriminalisation is to protect sex workers, and I haven't had any negative interactions at all about it.
And just from other political parties, is it too early to make an assessment, given you still sort of haven't introduced it per se?
I think it is. I think obviously Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and I think Sinn Féin at this point would be in favour, but I think people have to recognise that the law that was brought in didn't achieve what it was said it would achieve, which was to protect people. There's been no proof of that in the review that was done, so I think that has to be taken on board and should listen to people who are in these areas.
Rita, on Uber, I'm curious, the company might say that they are trying to cut costs for commuters. Yesterday the CEO of Dublin Bus said the average speed in which their buses are travelling at rush hour is 12 kilometres an hour. So this is another alternative for commuters, and the company is seeking to make it cheaper. Where does that kind of lie with you? Because obviously this is
obviously Uber is about making mega profits for itself, so it's not going to bring in cheaper fares if it means less profit. I think what they're trying to do is bring in the system that they have in the US and elsewhere, which is that any Tom, Dick and Harry can pick up a fare anywhere, rather than actual taxi drivers that are licensed. That's what it's about, and the question is, do we want that kind of system? It's not very safe either, by the way, for women or for anybody else. I think we want a properly regulated transport system. I think that people can rely on and isn't just outsourced and put into more and more private hands. These people are about making money. They're not about getting people moving around the city. And I think it's about undermining the NTA and the regulations and the agreements that they have with the drivers, rather than anything else.
So would you support, if the NTA were moving to reduce fare costs or their meter costs, prices, would you support that?
I mean, obviously I support any journeys being less in price for people. I just think what we have to look at here is the deregulation of everything. Like, look at the electricity system. We were promised that would bring cheaper prices, and it's brought the most expensive electricity in Europe, or in the EU anyway. And so it doesn't always mean, and I think that that's what's on the cards in the taxi industry as well. we have to have it regulated so that prices don't go off the chart.